I don't care who you think you are, you need to leave now.
لحظة واحدة يا سيد، أنت تسيء فهم هذا الموقف تماماً. هذا الرجل ضيفنا المحترم.
He sat there in a faded grey suit, looking at the menu like he couldn't afford a glass of water. To the staff at the Obsidian Room, Manhattan's most exclusive dining club, this man was nothing but a nuisance, destroying their aesthetic. They sneered, they whispered, and they made him wait. They didn't know that the bum at table 4 wasn't just a tourist. He was the owner of the very building they were standing in, and he was about to sign a billion-dollar merger that would change the city's skyline forever. They thought he was helpless. But they forgot one thing. The quiet waitress pouring his water didn't just serve tables. She was a former linguistic analyst who spoke fluent Arabic, and she heard every dirty secret they were trying to hide. The rain in Manhattan didn't wash away the grime. It just made the neon lights of the city reflect sharper on the wet pavement. Inside the Obsidian Room, however, the weather didn't exist. The air was perfumed with white truffle and old money. This was where the sharks of Wall Street came to feed, not on food, but on each other. Eloan adjusted her apron, wincing slightly as the stiff fabric dug into her waist. She had been on her feet for 10 hours straight. Her name tag, polished brass, read Eloan. But to the customers here, she was just Miss or Hey. Eloan, table 6 needs a refresh on the 82 Petrus. Move it. The voice belonged to Gavin, the floor manager. Gavin was a man who wore Italian suits that cost more than Eloan's car, yet he still looked cheap. He had the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, a predator's grin. He treated the staff like cattle, and the wealthy patrons like gods. Yes, Gavin, right away, Eloan said, keeping her head down. She couldn't afford to lose this job. The tips were the only thing keeping her younger sister, Clara, in the private care facility upstate. Every bottle of wine she uncorked was another day of treatment for Clara. She moved through the dining room with practiced grace, navigating between tables occupied by men who controlled the fate of nations. She heard snippets of conversation, hostile takeovers, offshore accounts in the Caymans, hush money payments. She heard it all, but she said nothing. In this world, the help was invisible. It was 8:15 p.m. when the front door opened. The heavy oak door, usually manned by a doorman who filtered out the riffraff, swung wide to reveal a short, unassuming man. He was soaking wet. His suit was ill-fitting, a generic grey shade that looked like it had been bought off the rack at a department store 5 years ago. He clutched a worn leather briefcase to his chest. The room went silent. In the Obsidian Room, poverty was the ultimate sin, and this man looked guilty as hell. Gavin was on him in a second. He marched to the hostess stand, his nose wrinkled as if he smelled something rotting. "Can I help you, sir?" Gavin asked, his tone dripping with icy condescension. He didn't offer to take the man's wet coat. He blocked the path to the dining room with his body. The man looked up, wiping rain from his glasses. "Yes, please. I have a reservation. The name is Al Saud." He spoke with a heavy accent, his English hesitant and broken. Gavin let out a short, mocking laugh. He looked at the iPad on the hostess stand, scrolling with exaggerated slowness. "Al Saud? I don't see it. And frankly, sir, we have a strict dress code. Jackets are required, but they must be appropriate." He gestured vaguely at the man's soggy attire. I make reservation online," the man insisted, clutching his briefcase tighter. "Table for 3. My guests. They come soon." Eloan, standing near the service station, polishing wine glasses, watched the scene unfold. She felt a familiar knot of anger in her stomach. She recognized the look in the man's eyes. It wasn't confusion. It was patience. Deep, weary patience. "Look, pal," Gavin said, dropping the polite facade. This isn't a soup kitchen. Maybe you're looking for the diner 3 blocks down. They serve burgers. You'll like it. The man stood his ground, though his shoulders slumped slightly. Please. I meet Mr. Hayes here. It is important. At the mention of Mr. Hayes, Gavin froze. Arthur Hayes, the CEO of Hayes & Co., a hedge fund titan who practically owned this part of the city. He was the Obsidian Room's most important client. If this wet, disheveled man was claiming to know Hayes, it was either the joke of the century or a massive misunderstanding. You, meeting Arthur Hayes? Gavin scoffed, looking around the room for an audience to share the joke with. Right. And I'm the King of England. Listen, I'm going to have security escort you out before you drip water on the Italian marble. Wait. Eloan stepped forward before she could stop herself. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She knew she should stay invisible, but something about the man's dignity in the face of Gavin's cruelty pulled at her. Gavin, she said quietly, coming up beside the manager. Table 4 is open. It's in the back corner. If he's waiting for Mr. Hayes, we should probably let him sit. If he's lying, Mr. Hayes will kick him out himself in 10 minutes. But if we kick out a guest of Mr. Hayes... She let the sentence hang. Gavin looked at her with disdain, but the logic landed. He knew Arthur Hayes's temper. If this little man was actually a guest, however unlikely, Gavin's head would be on a platter if he turned him away. Fine, Gavin sneered at Eloan. You take him, he's your problem. And if he orders tap water and leaves 0 tip, that's coming out of your paycheck, Eloan. Gavin turned back to the man, snapping his fingers. Follow her, back corner. Don't touch anything. Eloan gave the man a warm, apologetic smile. Right this way, sir. Let me take your coat. The man looked at her, and for a split second, the weary look in his eyes vanished, replaced by a sharp, assessing intelligence. Thank you, miss, he said softly. As they walked to the back, Eloan didn't know that she had just made the most dangerous ally, or enemy, of her life. Eloan seated the man, Mr. Al-Saud, at the secluded table in the back. It was usually reserved for mistresses or business deals that needed the shadows. She took his wet coat and hung it with care, bringing him a warm towel immediately. Can I get you something warm to drink while you wait, sir? Maybe a pot of mint tea? Eloan asked. The man looked surprised. Mint tea? Do you have fresh mint? I'll make sure the kitchen finds some, Eloan promised. She knew the chef hoarded the good herbs for the VIP plates, but she knew where the stash was. You are very kind, he said. My English is not so good. People, they do not have patience. Take your time, Eloan said gently. I'm not going anywhere. 10 minutes later, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. The heavy doors swung open again, but this time Gavin rushed forward, bowing and scraping like a servant from a period drama. Arthur Hayes had arrived. He was a massive man, broad-shouldered, wearing a bespoke navy suit that screamed power. Flanking him was his lawyer, a man named Matthew, who was known in the city as the Viper. They strode into the room as if they owned the air everyone else was breathing. Mr. Hayes, right this way. Your usual table is... Gavin began. Not the usual, Gavin, Hayes barked, not even looking at the manager. I'm meeting a... contact. Is he here? Short guy. Looks like he does his taxes at a library. Gavin swallowed hard, shooting a panicked look toward the back corner. Ah, yes. The gentleman is seated in the alcove. I had my best waitress attend to him personally. Hayes grunted and marched toward table 4. Eloan was just pouring the tea when Hayes and Matthew arrived. They didn't shake Mr. Al-Saud's hand. They didn't apologize for being late. They simply pulled out their chairs and sat down, dropping heavy leather folders onto the table with a thud that made the silverware rattle. All right, let's get this over with, Hayes said, loosening his tie. He looked at Eloan. Scotch. Blue label. Leave the bottle. And bring whatever he's having. He gestured dismissively at Mr. Al-Saud. Some juice or whatever. Eloan caught the flash of irritation in Mr. Al-Saud's eyes, but he remained silent, folding his hands on the table. As Eloan went to fetch the drinks, she lingered near the service station, just within earshot. It was a habit she picked up from her father. Before the accident that took him, her father had been a diplomat stationed in the Middle East. Eloan had spent her childhood in Riyadh and Dubai. She had learned to listen before she learned to speak. Look, Al, Hayes started, leaning forward aggressively. We've been going back and forth on this acquisition for months. The plot of land in Dubai you're sitting on is useless to you. It's sand. But for Hayes & Co., it's a parking lot for our new resort. Mr. Al-Saud nodded slowly. The Lamond. It has been in my family for generations. My grandfather. Yeah, sentimental value. I get it. Matthew, the lawyer, interrupted smoothly. He pulled a document from his folder. That's why we're offering you a very generous buyout. $5 million. Liquid. Immediate transfer. Eloan paused while polishing a glass. $5 million? That sounded low. She had read about the development project Hayes was planning. It was a 7-star complex. That land was worth 10 times that amount. Mr. Al-Saud picked up the document, squinting at the English text. $5 million. The last offer was different. Market fluctuations, Hayes lied without blinking. Oil prices dropped. Real estate is crashing in the sector. Honestly, we're doing you a favor, taking it off your hands. Then, Hayes did something incredibly stupid. He turned to Matthew and muttered, assuming the simple man across from him couldn't understand rapid-fire, slang-heavy English, or perhaps thinking he was too timid to react. But Hayes didn't just speak English. He switched to a code they often used, arrogance. But then, to exclude the outsider completely, Matthew pulled out his phone and showed Hayes a message. Don't worry, Matthew said, his voice low but audible to Eloan's trained ears. The contract is drafted in English, but the jurisdiction clause is buried on page 40. Once he signs, he waives all rights to sue in Saudi courts. We drag him into New York arbitration, bleed him dry with legal fees, and he'll fold. We'll get the land for pennies. Hayes laughed, a cruel, guttural sound. He doesn't have a clue. Look at him. He probably thinks 5 million is a kingdom. Just get him to sign the damn paper so we can order the lobster. Then, to Eloan's shock, Matthew leaned in and whispered something else. But he didn't whisper in English. He spoke a few words in broken, mocking Arabic, trying to sound sophisticated. Yalla, Habibi. Sign. Hurry up, my friend. Sign. It was an insult, a gross simplification. But then, Hayes's phone buzzed. He picked it up and spoke to someone on the other end. Yeah, I'm with the target now. The idiot is about to sign. We're going to flip this land to the Chinese developers next week for 80 million. Just keep the board quiet. He hung up and smiled at Mr. Al-Saud. Just standard procedure, my friend. A great deal for you. Mr. Al-Saud looked down at the paper, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for a pen. He looked defeated. He looked like a man who was about to be robbed in broad daylight. Eloan returned to the table with the scotch and the juice. She placed the crystal glass down in front of Hayes. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought they could hear it. She looked at Mr. Al-Saud. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, perhaps sensing her hesitation. If she spoke, she would be fired. Gavin would throw her out before she could untie her apron. She would lose the income for Clara's surgery. She would be blacklisted from every high-end restaurant in the city. But if she stayed silent, This man would lose his family's legacy to these vultures. Hayes uncapped his pen and shoved it toward the Saudi man. Here, sign on the dotted line, and you can go buy yourself a new suit. Eloan took a breath. She gripped the serving tray until her knuckles turned white. She looked at Mr. Al-Saud, and then, in clear, flawless, and high dialect Arabic, the kind spoken by royals and diplomats, not tourists, she spoke. Do not sign that paper, Sayyidi. They are lying to you. The land is worth 80 million, and they have hidden a clause on page 40 that strips you of your rights. The silence that followed was louder than a gunshot. The dining room of the obsidian room was designed to absorb sound. The velvet curtains, the thick carpets, the acoustic ceiling tiles, everything was engineered to keep the secrets of the rich whispered and contained. But Eloan's voice, though not shouted, had cut through the air like a knife through silk. Hayes froze, his glass of Blue Label halfway to his mouth. The liquid trembled slightly, betraying the sudden tension in his hand. He didn't understand the words she had spoken, but he understood the tone. It was a warning. And he understood the look on Mr. Al-Saud's face. The Saudi billionaire, who seconds ago had looked like a defeated man ready to sign away his birthright, was now staring at Eloan with wide, shocked eyes. He slowly lowered the pen he had been holding. The ink tip hovered over the paper, leaving a small, bleeding black dot on the signature line, a testament to how close he had come to the mistake of a lifetime. What did you say? Hayes asked, his voice low and dangerous. He set the glass down with a hard clack. What was that gibberish? Eloan stood tall. Her hands were shaking behind her back, but her face was a mask of calm. She had crossed the Rubicon. There was no going back to being the invisible waitress now. I asked the gentleman if he needed more water, sir. Eloan lied in English, her voice steady. Don't give me that, Matthew snapped. The lawyer looked rattled. He was the one who had whispered the details about the jurisdiction clause. He was the one who had mocked the man in broken Arabic. He looked at Mr. Al-Saud, trying to gauge how much damage had been done. Mr. Al-Saud slowly pushed the contract away from him. He looked up at Eloan, and for the first time, he spoke in Arabic to her, his voice commanding and sharp. Did you say 80 million? Are you certain? Eloan nodded, replying in the same formal dialect. I heard Mr. Hayes on the phone. They have a buyer lined up for next week, and the lawyer, the one in the glasses, boasted that once you sign, you cannot sue them in New York. They plan to bury you in arbitration. Stop it! Hayes slammed his hand on the table, causing the silverware to jump. Speak English. This is America. If you have something to say to my client, you say it to me. The commotion had finally attracted Gavin. The manager came sprinting across the dining room, his face pale. He saw the anger on Hayes's face, the vein bulging in his neck, the red flush of fury, and he knew his worst nightmare was happening. Mr. Hayes! Sir, is everything all right? Gavin gasped, arriving at the table breathless. He turned on Eloan instantly, his eyes bulging with panic. What did you do? I told you to pour the water and leave. She's interfering in a private business negotiation, Matthew hissed, pointing a manicured finger at Eloan. She's speaking to our client in a foreign language. She's feeding him lies. She is fired, Gavin said immediately. He didn't ask for an explanation. He didn't ask Eloan for her side of the story. He just reacted to save his own skin. He grabbed Eloan by the arm, his grip painful. Get out. Now. Don't even go to your locker. Get out of my restaurant before I call the police. Get your hands off her, a voice said. It wasn't Hayes. It wasn't Matthew. It was Mr. Al-Saud. The short man in the cheap grey suit stood up. He didn't look small anymore. He didn't look tired. He stood with the posture of a man who commanded armies. Excuse me? Gavin blinked, confused by the sudden authority coming from the bum at table 4. Mr. Al-Saud looked at Gavin, then at Hayes. I said, "Unhand her. If you touch her again, you will lose the hand." The threat was delivered so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that Gavin instinctively let go of Eloan's arm and took a step back. Hayes laughed, but it was a nervous, hollow sound. "Okay, look, Al, let's calm down. The waitress got confused. She doesn't know high finance. She probably heard us talking about something else. Let's just sign the papers and I'll have the car take you to your hotel." Mr. Al-Saud ignored Hayes completely. He turned to Eloan. "What is your name, child?" "Eloan, sir. Eloan Vance." "Eloan," he repeated, testing the name. "You speak the dialect of the Nejd region. Where did you learn this?" "My father," Eloan said, her voice trembling slightly as the adrenaline dump began to hit her system. "He was an attaché to the embassy in Riyadh for 15 years. I grew up there." Mr. Al-Saud nodded slowly. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "An attaché. A man of honor, no doubt. Unlike the men at this table." He turned back to Hayes. The warmth vanished from his eyes, replaced by a cold, hard steel. "There will be no signing, Mr. Hayes. There will be no deal." Hayes's face turned a shade of purple that matched the veins in his nose. "Now listen here, you little... We have a verbal agreement. You wasted my time. You wasted my firm's resources. You think you can just walk away because a waitress told you a fairy tale?" Hayes stood up, towering over the Saudi man. He used his height as a weapon, a tactic that had worked in boardrooms for 20 years. "You sign that paper, or I promise you, I will tie that land up in litigation. For so long your grandchildren won't see a dime. I will bleed you dry. Do you know who I am? I am Arthur Hayes." The entire restaurant had gone silent. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. The elite of New York were watching the show. Mr. Al-Saud didn't flinch. He reached into the inside pocket of his wet, cheap jacket. Matthew flinched, perhaps thinking he was reaching for a weapon. But Al-Saud pulled out a simple, old-fashioned flip phone. "You are Arthur Hayes," Al-Saud said calmly. "CEO of Hayes & Co. Your firm manages $40 billion in assets. You are leveraged 3-to-1 on the Asian markets, and your primary lender is the Al-Majed Sovereign Fund." Hayes blinked. The color drained from his face instantly. "How? How do you know about our liquidity backing?" "Because," Mr. Al-Saud said, flipping the phone open, "I am the chairman of the Al-Majed Sovereign Fund." The silence in the room was no longer just quiet. It was a vacuum. "No," Matthew whispered. "That's impossible. The chairman is Prince Khalid. You're just Al-Saud, a landowner." "Al-Saud is my family name, yes," the man said. "But my full name is Khalid bin Salman Al-Saud, and I believe, Mr. Hayes, that your loan covenants require you to maintain a standard of ethical business conduct. Trying to defraud the chairman of the bank that owns your debt, I believe that violates the clause." He pressed a button on his phone. "Eloan," the prince said, holding the phone out to her. "Would you be so kind as to speak to my chief of staff? Tell him to initiate the immediate recall of the Hayes & Cumshaw credit line. Tell him the COO attempted to steal from me." Eloan took the phone. It felt heavy in her hand, heavier than any tray she had ever carried. This was not just a phone. It was a gavel. On the other end of the line, a sharp voice answered in Arabic. "Yes, Your Highness?" Eloan took a deep breath. She looked at Hayes. The arrogance was gone. The man looked like he was having a heart attack. He was mouthing the word "no" over and over again. Matthew had slumped into his chair, burying his head in his hands. "This is Eloan," she said into the phone, her Arabic crisp and clear. "His Highness has instructed me to inform you to recall the credit line for Hayes & Co. immediately. The reason is attempted fraud against the chairman." "Understood," the voice on the other end said efficiently. "It is done. The transfer orders are being halted as we speak. We are freezing their operational accounts." Eloan handed the phone back to the prince. "It is done, Your Highness," she said. Prince Khalid nodded. He looked at Hayes. "You have about 10 minutes before your company cards stop working, Mr. Hayes. I suggest you pay the bill quickly." Hayes looked like he was going to vomit. "Your Highness, please, it was a misunderstanding, a negotiation tactic. That's all. We can renegotiate. I'll give you the 80 million. I'll give you 90. "It is not about the money," Prince Khalid said, his voice quiet but echoing in the silent room. "It is about the disrespect. You saw a man in a cheap suit, and you thought he was stupid. You saw a waitress, and you thought she was deaf. You judge the book by the cover, Mr. Hayes, and now the library is closed." Prince Khalid turned to Gavin, the manager, who was shaking like a leaf. "And you?" the prince said. "Yes, sir." "Your Highness?" Gavin stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You treat your staff like slaves. I watched you. You snapped your fingers at her. You threatened her. You have no honor." I was just maintaining standards, Your Highness. The Obsidian Room is a world-class establishment," Gavin pleaded. "Not anymore," the prince said. He looked around the room, at the expensive art, the crystal chandeliers, the terrified diners. "I find the atmosphere here suffocating." "Eloan." "Yes, Your Highness." "Do you like working here?" Eloan looked at Gavin. She looked at the heavy trays, the ungrateful customers, the weeks of aching feet and verbal abuse. "No, sir. I hate it." "Good," the prince said, "because I am buying the building." The room gasped. "This building," the prince continued, gesturing to the walls. "It belongs to the Holloway Trust, correct? I have been looking for a location for my new charitable foundation's headquarters in New York. I think this will do. I will make the call in the morning, which means, Mr. Manager, that by tomorrow noon you will be trespassing on my property." The prince picked up his briefcase. He didn't look back at the table where the ruined men sat. He turned to Eloan. "Get your coat, Eloan. You are leaving with me." I can't just leave, sir," Eloan said, looking at the mess of dirty dishes. Your shift is over," the prince said firmly. "You have done me a great service today. You saved my family's land. Do you think I will let you stay here and be abused by these people? Besides, I have a job opening. I need a personal translator. One who is honest. One who is not afraid to speak the truth to power." He paused, looking at her kindly. "I pay considerably more than tips. And I believe you mentioned a sister." Eloan felt tears prick her eyes. "Clara." "Yes." "My medical team is the best in the world," the prince said. "We will fly her to Zurich. They will fix whatever is wrong. Consider it a signing bonus." Eloan dropped her tray. It clattered loudly on the floor, the sound of her chains breaking. She untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table right in front of Gavin. "I quit," she said. She walked toward the coat check, her head held high. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. But the drama wasn't over. As they reached the front door, the heavy oak entrance slammed open. 2 police officers stepped in, hands on their holsters. "We got a call about a disturbance," the older officer barked, "and a report of a theft." Gavin, seeing a last-ditch chance to save his ego, pointed a shaking finger at Eloan. "Her! She's stealing! And him! That man is a fraud! He's harassing the customers!" Hayes, seeing a lifeline, jumped up. Yes, officer. That man threatened me, and that waitress tried to extort me. Arrest them. The prince stopped. He turned slowly to face the officers. He didn't raise his hands. He just adjusted his glasses. Officers, the prince said calmly, before you make a mistake that will end your careers, I suggest you look at the diplomat license plates on the car waiting outside. And then, I suggest you ask Mr. Hayes why he is sweating so much. The officers hesitated. They looked at the disheveled man in the grey suit, and then at the screaming billionaire. They were confused. In New York, the guy in the suit is usually the good guy. I said arrest him, Hayes screamed, losing all composure. He's a nobody, a bum. Officer, Eloan stepped forward. She knew how the system worked. She knew they needed proof. Check Mr. Hayes's pockets. He has a recording device. He records all his business meetings. If you listen to the last 20 minutes, you will hear him admit to fraud and conspiracy. Hayes's hand flew instinctively to his breast pocket. It was a tell so obvious a child could spot it. The older officer's eyes narrowed. He had been a cop for 30 years. He knew a guilty tick when he saw one. He walked past the prince and approached Hayes. Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down, the officer said. Don't touch me. Do you know who I am? Hayes roared. Yeah, the officer said, pulling out his handcuffs. You're the guy making a scene. Turn around. As Hayes was being read his rights, resisting arrest and disorderly conduct being the start of his bad night, Eloan and the prince walked out into the cool, rain-washed air of the New York night. A black limousine, sleek and armored, pulled up to the curb. A driver in a sharp uniform jumped out to open the door. To the Plaza Hotel, Your Highness? The driver asked. Yes, the prince said. He gestured for Eloan to get in. As she sank into the leather seat, leaving the smell of stale wine and desperation behind her, Eloan thought the story was over. She thought the villain was defeated. But she was wrong. Arthur Hayes was not just a CEO. He was a man with connections to the darkest parts of the underworld. And as he sat in the back of the squad car, watching the limo drive away, he wasn't thinking about lawyers. He was thinking about revenge. He pulled a second, smaller burner phone from his sock, one the police hadn't found yet. He sent a single text message to a number that didn't exist in any directory. The girl. And the Saudi. Take them out. Tonight. Eloan had won the battle at the Obsidian Room, but the war for her life had just begun. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, blurring the lights of Times Square as the limousine glided through the traffic. Inside, the silence was heavy but comfortable. Prince Khalid watched Eloan as she texted her sister's nurse, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the phone screen. She is sleeping, Eloan said, a small smile gracing her lips. The nurse said she had a good day. She will have many good days to come, Khalid promised. My pilot is prepping the Gulf Stream. You will fly out tomorrow. But peace is often the breath before the scream. Suddenly, a heavy black SUV swerved from the left lane, slamming into the side of the limousine with a deafening screech of metal. The impact threw Eloan against the door. The prince's bodyguard, sitting in the front passenger seat, shouted a warning, but it was too late. Another SUV boxed them in from the front, forcing the limo to a screeching halt on a deserted stretch of the West Side Highway. "Stay down!" the bodyguard, a hulking man named Frank, yelled. He drew his weapon, but before he could open the door, the glass shattered. A canister of tear gas was thrown inside. Smoke filled the cabin instantly. Choking, coughing, Eloan grabbed the prince's arm. "Get down, the floor!" Through the haze, she saw men in tactical gear approaching the car. They weren't police. They moved with the precision of mercenaries. Hayes hadn't just hired thugs. He had hired a cleanup crew. Frank kicked his door open, firing 2 shots before he was silenced by a taser prong to the chest. The driver was already unconscious, slumped over the wheel. "Get them out! Make it look like a robbery gone wrong!" a voice shouted from outside. Eloan's eyes watered from the gas, but her mind snapped into a place it hadn't visited since her father's days in Riyadh, when she had taken defensive driving and awareness courses as a diplomat's daughter. She didn't panic. She analyzed. 3 attackers visible. 2 vehicles. The limo is armored, but the integrity is compromised. She looked at the partition between the back and front seats. It was shattered. "Your Highness," Eloan choked out, grabbing a heavy crystal decanter from the limo's bar. "Do you trust me?" "Yes," Khalid wheezed, his eyes red and streaming. "Cover your ears." Eloan didn't wait. She didn't act like a waitress. She scrambled through the broken partition into the front seat, shoving the unconscious driver aside. She didn't try to open the locked doors. Instead, she slammed the gear shift into reverse. The mercenaries were expecting the occupants to cower in the back. They weren't expecting the 5-ton armored beast to lurch backward. The limo slammed into the SUV behind them with the force of a freight train. The impact crumpled the SUV's hood and knocked 2 of the gunmen off their feet. Eloan shifted to drive and floored it. She spun the wheel hard to the right, aiming for the gap between the concrete barrier and the lead SUV. Sparks flew as the limo scraped against the wall, a horrible grinding sound that vibrated through her bones. Bullets pinged off the bulletproof glass, spiderwebbing the windshield, but they held. "Hold on!" Eloan screamed. She punched through the gap, clipping the mercenary leader who tried to jump onto the hood. The limo roared free, fishtailing on the wet asphalt before gripping the road. She didn't slow down. She drove with the skill of a stunt driver, weaving through traffic, running red lights, putting as much distance between them and the ambush as possible. "You drive remarkably well," Prince Khalid said from the back seat, wiping blood from a small cut on his forehead. "My father insisted I learn evasive driving," Eloan said, her hands white-knuckled on the wheel. "He said you never know when a dinner party might turn into a war zone. I thought he was paranoid." "He was wise," Khalid said grimly. "We cannot go to the hotel. They will be watching it. Hayes knows we escaped." "I know a place," Eloan said. "It's not a palace, but it's safe." She drove them to Queens, to a small, run-down convent attached to a hospital, St. Jude's. It was where the nuns had cared for her sister before she was moved to the state facility. The Mother Superior, a stern woman named Sister Beatrice, opened the door at 2:00 a.m. She didn't ask questions when she saw the battered limo and the disheveled Saudi royal. She simply ushered them inside. In the safety of the sanctuary, Prince Khalid made a call. This time, he didn't call his bank. He called the director of the FBI. "Yes," Khalid said into the phone, his voice cold as ice. "An assassination attempt on foreign diplomatic soil. The assailant is Arthur Hayes. No, do not arrest him yet. He thinks we are dead or running. I want to catch him when he feels safest. I want him to fall from the highest height." He hung up and looked at Eloan. She was washing the soot off her face in a small basin. "Tomorrow," Khalid said, "Hayes is holding a press conference at the stock exchange. He plans to announce the acquisition of my land, forging my signature if he has to save his company's stock price. He thinks he has won." Eloan looked up. Her eyes were hard. The waitress was gone. "Let's go crash a party," she said. The grand hall of the New York Stock Exchange was buzzing. It was Dinto Buenos Mortem. The cameras were rolling. Arthur Hayes stood at the podium, looking fresh and victorious. He had posted bail at 4:00 a.m., money talks, and his lawyers had spun the restaurant arrest as a misunderstanding and harassment by a deranged fan. As for the hit on the highway, there were no witnesses, and the limo had vanished. As far as Hayes knew, the Saudi and the Waitress were at the bottom of the Hudson River. He smiled for the cameras. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes announced, his voice booming. "Despite the rumors and the malicious attacks on my character, I am proud to announce that Hayes & Co. has secured the exclusive rights to the Almaged Development Tract. This deal will bring billions to New York City." The reporters scribbled furiously. The stock price of Hayes & Combs began to tick upward on the ticker behind him. "We have the signed contracts," Hayes lied, holding up a folder. "And we have the full support of the Al-Saud family, who unfortunately could not be here today, as they had to depart the country suddenly." A few of his cronies in the front row chuckled. "Any questions?" Hayes asked, smug satisfaction oozing from every pore. "I have a question," a voice rang out from the back of the hall. The crowd parted. Walking down the center aisle was not a ghost. It was Prince Khalid, dressed not in a cheap grey suit, but in the full, flowing, traditional bisht of a Saudi royal, gold-trimmed and majestic. And on his arm was Eloan. She was unrecognizable. The Waitress uniform was gone. She wore a tailored crimson power suit that cost more than Hayes's car. Her hair was pulled back, sharp and professional. She looked like a CEO, a queen, a force of nature. Hayes's face went white. He gripped the podium so hard the wood creaked. "Security, get them out. These are the imposters." "Sit down, Arthur," Eloan said. Her voice was amplified by a microphone she had taken from a stunned sound technician. It echoed through the hall. "This man," Eloan pointed at Hayes, "hired mercenaries to run our car off the road 5 hours ago. He attempted to murder a foreign dignitary and a U.S. citizen to cover up his fraud." "Lies! She's a waitress! She's crazy!" Hayes screamed, sweat pouring down his face. "She serves appetizers. She doesn't know what she's saying." "I may have served appetizers," Eloan said calmly, stepping onto the stage. She looked at the cameras. "But I also speak 3 languages. I possess a master's degree in linguistics, and I have something you don't have, Arthur." She pulled a small flash drive from her pocket. "I have the audio from the car," she said. The room went deadly silent. "You see," Eloan continued, "the limo wasn't just armored. It was wired. The prince records his movements for security. We have your men, on tape, identifying you as the client. We have the wire transfer records from your offshore account to the mercenary group Black River." She nodded to the tech booth. "Play it." The speakers blared, the sound of crunching metal, the gunshots, and then the voice of the mercenary leader. Hayes said no witnesses. "Burn the car." The gasp from the crowd sucked the air out of the room. Hayes tried to run. He actually scrambled off the stage, shoving a cameraman aside, heading for the emergency exit. But the exit doors slammed open. This time it wasn't the NYPD. It was the FBI. Dozens of agents in windbreakers swarmed the room. "Arthur Hayes!" an agent yelled. "Freeze! Federal agents!" Hayes froze. He looked around. The investors were looking at him with disgust. The cameras were zooming in on his face. The king of Wall Street was now just a rat in a trap. He looked at Eloan one last time. "You're just a nobody," he hissed, tears of rage in his eyes. "You're nothing." Eloan walked up to him, flanked by the prince. She leaned in close, so only he could hear. "I'm the waitress who just served you your last meal," she whispered. "Bon appétit." The days following the arrest of Arthur Hayes were a blur of flashbulbs, subpoenas, and vindication. The story didn't just break, it shattered the news cycle. The image of the waitress and the prince, standing side by side on the floor of the stock exchange, became the photo of the year. Eloan sat in a quiet, safe house provided by the FBI, watching the television in the corner. The screen showed Arthur Hayes, the Titan of Wall Street, doing the perp walk. He was handcuffed, his expensive suit rumpled, his face hidden behind his hands. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, Hayes & Co. Assets frozen. CEO denied bail. It was the hard karma Eloan had dreamed of, but seeing it play out was surreal. The report cut to an interview with a federal prosecutor. The evidence provided by Ms. Vance and Prince Khalid is irrefutable, the prosecutor said, looking grim. We have audio recordings of conspiracy to commit capital murder, wire fraud, and international racketeering. Mr. Hayes isn't looking at a plea deal. He is looking at life without parole in a supermax facility. Eloan turned the TV off. The silence in the room was heavy, but for the first time in years, it wasn't oppressive. It was peaceful. Her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but she answered it. Ms. Vance? The voice was shaky, terrified. It was Gavin. What do you want, Gavin? Eloan asked, her voice cool. Eloan, please, Gavin whimpered. The police. They're here. They're shutting down the obsidian room. They say it's a crime scene. I told them I didn't know anything. You have to tell them, Eloan. Tell them I was just doing my job. I didn't know Hayes was a killer. Eloan leaned back in her chair. She remembered the way Gavin had snapped his fingers at her. She remembered him threatening to dock her pay because a customer was rude. She remembered him grabbing her arm. You were doing your job, Gavin, Eloan said softly. Your job was to protect your staff and your guests. Instead, you served a predator and threw me to the wolves because you thought I was worthless. You watched a man be humiliated because of his coat, and you laughed. I can change. I can be a character witness for you, Gavin pleaded. Please, no one will hire me in this city. My name is Mud. Karma is a mirror, Gavin, Eloan said. It only reflects what you stand in front of it. Good luck with the job hunt. She hung up and blocked the number. That door was closed. 2 days later, the rain had cleared, leaving New York crisp and bright. A convoy of black SUVs pulled up to the service entrance of the care facility upstate. Eloan stepped out of the lead car. She wasn't wearing her waitress uniform, nor the borrowed power suit. She wore jeans and a soft cashmere sweater, clothes that fit the woman she actually was, not the role she had been forced to play. Prince Khalid waited by the car, respecting her privacy. He was on his phone, handling the liquidation of Hayes's assets, which his legal team was systematically dismantling to fund a new trust for victims of corporate fraud. Inside, the smell of antiseptic usually made Eloan's stomach turn, but today it smelled like hope. She walked into room 304. Clara was sitting up in bed, looking frail but alert. The younger girl's eyes widened when she saw Eloan. "El," Clara whispered. "The nurses. They're packing my things. They said I'm being transferred. They said, a prince is paying for it?" Eloan rushed forward and hugged her sister, burying her face in Clara's shoulder. She held on tight, letting the tears finally fall. "It's true, Clara," Eloan choked out. "We're leaving. We're going to Zurich. There's a specialist there, Dr. Weber. Khalid, the prince. He says Dr. Weber has a 95% success rate with your condition. You're going to get better." Clara pulled back, looking at her big sister with awe. "But how? You're just a waitress. That's what you always say." Eloan wiped her eyes and smiled, a fierce, proud smile. "Not anymore. Turns out I'm a pretty good translator, too." The transfer was efficient. The prince's medical team handled Clara like she was porcelain. Within an hour, they were in the ambulance, heading to Teterboro Airport. The private airfield was windy. The Gulfstream jet sat on the tarmac, a gleaming silver bird ready to take them to a new life. Before boarding, Prince Khalid turned to Eloan. The wind caught his gutra, but he stood still, looking at the Manhattan skyline in the distance. "You know," Khalid said thoughtfully, "Hayes asked to see me yesterday. From his cell." Eloan stiffened. "Did you go?" "I did," Khalid nodded. "I wanted to see if he had any remorse." "And?" "He screamed at me," Khalid said, a faint, dark amusement in his eyes. "He blamed me for tricking him. He blamed you for eavesdropping. He still believes he is the victim. He offered me $10 million hidden in a Cayman account if I would recant my statement." "What did you say?" Eloan asked. "I told him that I bought his debt," Khalid said simply. "I told him that the Al-Majed Fund now owns the mortgage on his Hamptons estate, his penthouse, and even the building his wife lives in. I told him I am evicting them all and turning his estate into a public park for the poor." Eloan laughed. It was a sound of pure release. "You really did that?" "I despise bullies, Eloan," Khalid said, his face serious, "and I have the resources to ensure they never bully again." He turned to her, his expression softening. "Which brings me to my offer. The contract." Eloan looked down at her hands. "Khalid, you've done enough. You're saving my sister. I don't expect a job on top of charity." "It is not charity," Khalid said firmly. "Eloan, look at me." She looked up. "In that restaurant, surrounded by enemies, you didn't flinch. In the car, under fire, you didn't panic. In the stock exchange, you didn't stutter. I have advisors who went to Oxford and Harvard who would have crumbled where you stood tall. I do not need a servant. I have plenty of those. I need a partner. I need a chief of strategy who understands that the world is not fair and who is willing to fight to make it so." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather-bound folio. "This is not a Waitress contract," he said. "This is a 5-year contract. You will head my philanthropic division. We will hunt down people like Hayes, corrupt officials, abusive CEOs, and we will use my capital to expose them. You will be the sword, and I will be the shield." Eloan took the folio. She ran her hand over the leather. It felt substantial. It felt real. "And Clara?" she asked. "Clara will live with us in the estate in Zurich until she is recovered. Then she can go to the university of her choice. On me." Eloan looked back at the city one last time. She thought of the long shifts, the aching feet, the rude customers, the feeling of being invisible. She thought of Gavin begging for a job. She thought of Hayes rotting in a cell. She looked at the prince, a man who had seen her value when she was wearing an apron. "We have a lot of work to do," Eloan said. "We do," Khalid agreed. "Shall we start?" "One condition," Eloan said, a playful glint returning to her eyes. "Name it." "No more cheap grey suits. If we're going to take down billionaires, you need to look like you can buy them." Khalid laughed, gesturing up the stairs of the jet. "Deal." Eloan walked up the stairs, the folio clutched to her chest. As she stepped into the cabin, the heavy door sealed shut behind her, locking out the noise, the rain, and the past. The engines roared to life, a powerful crescendo that drowned out the world below. As the jet lifted off, banking sharply over the Hudson River, Eloan didn't look down. She looked forward into the blue sky, ready for the next chapter. The waitress was gone. The Avenger had arrived. And the world was about to find out exactly what Eloan Vance could do. And that is how Eloan went from serving tables to bringing down an empire. Hayes thought his money made him untouchable, but he learned the hard way that integrity is the only currency that matters. Eloan's sister got the surgery she needed, and Eloan never had to wear an apron again unless she wanted to. It just goes to show, never underestimate the person serving your coffee. They might just be the one to save your life or ruin it. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. What would you have done if you were in Eloan's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.